Good morning. You know, I was standing here and I was just thinking about a story. There's a story about a guy who dies and he goes to the pearly gates and they say, well, he's a guy from New Orleans. And they say, listen, the way it works up here is you got to come up with a story, an impressive story about your life. And you get to choose one story. And for the rest of eternity, you got to tell that story over and over and over again. So make it impressive. And he says, oh, well, I was in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina, so maybe I'll tell that story. And St. Peter says, well, okay. He says, what? He says, well, just, remember Noah's in the audience. And so, this work that we're doing in our Rondo community is sacred to me. Because I'm a child of Rondo. I'm a child of this community. My mother is in the audience, who's Met Council member Tony Carter. It's great to see you here this morning. And as a kid, we'd be driving on 94. And somewhere right around that Dale Street exit, my father would say, you're in my bedroom now. And I grew up hearing the stories of our old Rondo community here in St. Paul. And I've traveled places, and I get to tell folks kind of some of what we're doing here in St. Paul. And I say, listen, I don't know the name of the neighborhood in your city, but you have that neighborhood in your city. Wherever you're from, you have that story in your city. And I remember hearing those stories. And we would go to our Rondo Days festival, which Mr. Anderson was one of the founders of every year, and talk about the old stories. And we'd hear that we'd celebrate sort of the memorialization of this community that once was. And as we think about all the things that we're trying to reconnect, as we're having a big conversation about a land bridge here in St. Paul, but I fear sometimes people think when we say reconnect, they think we're just talking about physically. That we're just talking about a physical reconnection. But we're talking about an economic reconnection. We're talking about a social reconnection. We're talking about a residential reconnection. And we're also talking about what I think of as a reconnection, sort of this bridge, not just from one side of the freeway to the other, but this bridge from the past to the future. Because growing up, Rondo was a past tense term for me. It was a concept of some incredible thing that used to be. And as we've gotten into this conversation, and I said I feel like I'm talking to Noah because I know a lot of you are actually doing this work. My job is to heroically sign papers, while other people actually, oftentimes end up in the trenches. People like Mr. Anderson, who is one of the youngest people in our community, energy-wise. So we appreciate, the drive and the gush that you get. Please. But we've shifted the conversation about Rondo in St. Paul. This is what excites me. From one about the past, to a conversation about the future. From a conversation about what we mourn that once was, to a conversation about what we're excited that could be. We're shifting this. And from a conversation where us young folks sort of sit on the floor and listen to our elders tell stories and show pictures, to one that centers around this youthful, energetic, exciting, moonshot vision of what we can have in our community. I got old elders in the community who always say, listen, if you get your hands on some land, never let go of it, because that's the one thing they ain't making no more of. We making more land. We're literally making more land. And you know that land is wealth. Land is opportunity. And so this excites me, this vision of this opportunity to reconnect our Rondo communities to the future. It excites me, this opportunity to say we're going to literally create wealth. We're going to literally create wealth by virtue of creating land. We're literally creating wealth for members of our community. And that means we have to have an intentional conversation of who gets to access that wealth and how that wealth is accessed for the future. See, in St. Paul, we have a conversation about Rondo. And there's a study that shows, Keith, is it $157 million in today's dollars of wealth stolen from our African American community here through that Rondo process. And don't you know, for the last 20 years, I've gotten to hear elected leaders, mayors and city council members and county commissioners and governors and elected public leaders look at that and say, hey, that was wrong. Sorry. And I think that if I took $157 million from you and admitted that I took $157 million from you and admitted and we agreed that it was wrong, it's possible that something more than sorry is appropriate. It's possible that some response beyond, hey, we shouldn't have done that, is called for. And so when we build this big vision for this land bridge, we just this year launched this initiative that we call the Inheritance Fund in St. Paul that says, look, let's take people like me, frankly. I inherited over half a dozen pieces of paper that says once upon a time, our family owned property on a street called Rondo. And the idea is to help to facilitate the re-establishment of those family inheritances that were gutted. And so we started a fund that says, listen, for direct descendants of families that were uprooted to build that freeway, here we're going to set aside up to $110,000 in fully forgivable financing to purchase a home. Up to $85,000 in fully forgivable financing to renovate an existing home if you're already in place here. And one of the things that we learned is that there's a difference, as I was on the city council during the height of the foreclosure crisis, one of the things that we learned is that there's a difference between facilitating someone getting their name on a mortgage and facilitating wealth creation through home ownership. And so our work can't just be about putting a name on a mortgage. It's got to be about ensuring that someone is better off. And so just last month, we got a chance to do a ribbon cutting for the first home that we closed on through our inheritance fund. A young man, 24 years old, who purchased a home for $229,000 with the assistance of $90,000 in forgivable financing from the city. And so we're excited about what we're building. And here's where I'll close because I know you have a lot to do today. But I want to give you a challenge. What we're building is this concept. And in my bio, I don't know who writes those beautiful words, but they sound amazing. It calls me an unapologetic champion for equity. And one of the things that I've learned about equity is we all have gotten really good at pointing out when it's not equity. We've all gotten really good at saying, hey, that's not equity there. Hey, you don't get any equity points for that. We've gotten really good at knowing when something's not equity. But I bet you if we went around the room and passed the microphone and asked everybody, what is equity? We'd have 100 different answers. And I'm just saying that one of the things that I've learned is you can't build something. You can't establish something. You can't reconnect something on the basis of knowing what it's not. We better figure out what we're talking about when we say equity. And see, a long time ago, I went to business school at the Florida A&M University, which is the largest and livest of the historically black colleges, it sounds like. And there may be people in this room that disagree, but I have the microphone right now, so when you get a turn, you can share your opinions. When my business school dean said the word equity, she wasn't talking about some amorphous concept of social justice and inclusion. She was very simply talking about money. When my business school dean said equity, she was talking about shares of ownership of an appreciable and transferable asset that I could pass on to my kids when it came time. And so if we're going to be committed to equity, I'm not all that interested in, what the pictures look like, and I'm not all that interested in like how I feel when I go to bed. I'm interested in who we're facilitating wealth creation for. I'm interested in how we're facilitating the accumulation of wealth through appreciable, transferable assets. Equity has got to be about asset building. When my business school dean said equity, she was talking about decision-making power, because if I own equity in a company, then I get a vote on those important decisions. So if our organizations or if our cities are going to be committed to equity, I try to be as altruistic as I can be. But I have a confession to make. And that is this. When I make decisions in City Hall, they're very rarely decisions that I think will screw me over. And I'm just saying, every decision that's ever been made in the history of humankind has been made to benefit the decision maker. That makes sense, right? And so if our goal is for our city halls, if our goal is for our cities, if our goal is for our organizations to benefit a broader set of people, to me, the only logical approach is to have a broader set of decision makers. I heard one of the panelists say that just earlier, that we have to engage people and we have to think of new ways. I think about a place at my high school that has a shortcut cut in the grass, where students have sort of cut across the grass for 20 years. And it occurs to me that if we said, listen, next Wednesday at 5:30 in City Hall, there will be a public hearing on optimal sidewalk alignment. Everyone who's interested in optimal sidewalk alignment, please report to City Hall at 5:30 on next Wednesday. We probably wouldn't get that many students responding. But here's the thing. Every day, 2,500 students know that it makes more sense to cut across the grass than to go up and around and back around and over around. And that's a discourse on two things. One, the fact that we oftentimes try to figure out how to get people to follow these arbitrary geometric patterns and shapes that we create with our public processes, as opposed to trying to figure out how to create our public processes in ways that literally pave the ground under their feet. But two, it's a reminder that our communities, whether they come to our public meetings or not, whether they speak in our microphones or not, they're always voting with their feet. They're always telling us what they need. They're always telling us what works and what doesn't work for us. And the question isn't, will they tell us? The question is, how many different ways can we listen to the things that our communities are screaming out and waiting for their cities to catch up with them on? And so equity has to be about assets. Equity has to be about decision-making power. And then the third thing that's really critical to me is equity has to be about a shared economy. If I own equity in a company and that company has a good quarter, then by definition, I have a good quarter too. And so I say all of this just to say, because in this space, I know that we have a group of folks who are committed to the work that you do. My guess is we have folks in this room who get awards for the work that you do. And people go, that was amazing. And you go home and you say, wow, we can still, there's still, I'm still trying to, and I think maybe we can take some of the leadership pressure off of ourselves if we stop trying to figure out how to close our doors and come up with the best ideas and start trying to say, when we identify a community that we can serve better, when we identify a space, whether it's young people or people of color or low-income Americans or whoever it is, the question isn't how do I serve those folks better? The question is, how do I facilitate asset creation? How do I invite into decision-making processes, and how do I make sure that the fate of our company, the fate of our city, the fate of our organization is married to the fate of this community that we want to serve? So that there's just no way for us to float without people floating. We're 5 weeks into the NFL season, and just a couple of weeks ago I was laughing because Kirk Cousins, who's our quarterback, the guy who throws the ball, and Justin Jefferson, who's our wide receiver, the guy who catches the ball. Our quarterback had more passing yards than anybody in the NFL, and our wide receiver had more receiving yards than anybody in the NFL. And so it sounds like they're doing their job great, but the thing is, we hadn't won a game yet. And I think cities are like that. We've all learned, and I'm sure I'm out of time, so I'll sit down. But this is important to me. We have all inherited a model of city building that essentially tells us that cities are a stack of buildings and streets and bricks and concrete. And if the buildings are in good shape, and if the streets are in good shape, and the bricks and the concrete are in good shape, then our job is done well. We don't buy that in St. Paul. We believe that a city is a family of people that has got to take care of one another. See, if we think a city's a stack of streets and concrete, well, then it's fine to bulldoze homes to build a road. It's fine to displace people for concrete. It leads us to really, really strange decisions. But if we understand that a city is a community, a city is a family, a city is a group of people, and all the infrastructure that we do, and all the transit that we do, and all of the housing that we build, and all the businesses that we build, and all the buildings that we fund, have to exist in service to those people, then a story like Rondo can never happen again. And so that's our focus, is the big bet that we're doing in St. Paul, and I know you're doing this work too, is to say, what would it look like instead of a city betting on streets, instead of a city betting on bricks and mortar? What would it look like for a city to go all in on the unlimited human potential that already exists within? That's what we're reconnecting. We're plugging in our communities. We're plugging in our country to the incredible gigawattage that exists in the communities that have been disconnected for too long. Thank you for being at the core of that work. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you for doing us the honor of gracing St. Paul with this gathering today. And with that, I want to kick it on the screen to a good friend of mine and someone I learned from quite a bit, and that is the mayor of the city of Baltimore, Brandon Scott. Thank you very much.